The Interstellar Survival Academy on Arcturus 7 represented the pinnacle of environmental adaptation training in the known galaxy. 17 species contributed to its curriculum, each bringing their homeworld's unique flavor of existential dread to share with eager students. The facility itself perched on a moon where weather didn't so much occur as actively conspire against biological life, making it the perfect classroom for teaching young sentients how not to die in inconvenient places. The architecture blended Krell crystalline technology with Vendorian phase shielding, creating structures that could theoretically survive anything short of stellar collapse. Theoretically being the operative word, as the insurance premiums suggested a different story. Professor Kowalczyk stood at the front of Lecture Hall 7, his thermal-resistant carapace gleaming under the bioluminescent panels. As a Thermalian, he'd evolved on a world where the coolest summer day would liquefy lead, which gave him certain professional opinions about cold weather survival. Opinions he shared frequently, loudly, and with the unshakable confidence of someone who'd never personally experienced temperatures below boiling. His 17 eyes scanned the assembled students with the satisfied air of an expert about to impart wisdom to the tragically ignorant. The class represented 8 different species, each convinced their particular evolutionary path had prepared them uniquely for survival challenges. They were all wrong, but that discovery lay several hours and one meteorological catastrophe in their future. Among the chitinous wrecks, crystalline shardlings and gelatinous morphids sat Marcus Webb, the only human in a cohort of 43 students. He occupied a thermal-regulated seat designed for silicon-based life forms, which meant it was approximately the right size but radiated heat like a malfunctioning reactor. Humans, as the galaxy had learned over their brief 70 years in the interstellar community, had this inconvenient habit of showing up in places where nobody expected competence and then casually redefining expectations. Marcus currently looked the part of least likely to succeed, hunched in his oversized seat, stylus hovering over his datapad, with what his classmates interpreted as confusion, but was actually careful note-taking. The Thermalian professor activated the holographic display, which materialized a rotating model of Arcturus 7's northern continent. Today we address extreme cold environment survival, Kowalczyk announced, his translator rendering his volcanic vent rumble voice into flat galactic standard. A straightforward module, as cold weather poses minimal challenge with proper technological application. Several students murmured agreement. After all, they'd all reviewed the equipment catalogs. Thermal suits rated for absolute zero, portable fusion heaters, emergency shelters with climate control sophisticated enough to simulate beach weather during an ice age. What could possibly require more than following basic equipment protocols? The fundamental principle, the professor continued, gesturing at atmospheric data scrolling beside the planetary model, is maintaining thermal equilibrium through external energy sources. Biological adaptation to cold is, with rare exceptions, insufficient for true survival scenarios. His middle left eye swiveled toward Marcus with what might have been concern or possibly condescension. Thermalian expressions didn't translate well. Some species, particularly those from moderate climate worlds, simply lack the physiological mechanisms for adequate thermal regulation. This is not a failing, merely evolutionary reality. Technology bridges these gaps admirably. A Vrex student, her name translating roughly to clicks in darkness, raised a chitinous appendage. Professor, what constitutes adequate physiological thermal regulation? Her homeworld featured temperature swings of 300 degrees between day and night, which her species managed through metabolic tricks that would make a biochemist weep. Excellent question, Kowalczyk rumbled. Adequate regulation implies maintaining core temperature within survivable parameters without external technological intervention for minimum periods. Most species can manage brief exposure. Extended survival in true cold requires either specialized evolution or equipment. He pulled up a comparison chart showing various species' cold tolerance. Humans appeared near the bottom, just above the Xanthori, whose liquid nitrogen biology made them spectacularly unsuited for anywhere warmer than a comet's surface. As you can observe, species from moderate climates demonstrate predictable limitations. Marcus said nothing, continuing his notes. He'd learned during his first week that contradicting professors rarely improved grades, regardless of how wrong they might be. Besides, the practical examination would speak louder than any lecture hall debate. The professor cycled through slides detailing equipment specifications, emergency protocols, and shelter construction using the provided technological packages. Everything gleamed with the confidence of superior engineering. Thermal suits woven from metamaterials that actively generated heat. Shelters that deployed in 45 seconds and maintained internal temperatures within 1 degree of programmed settings. Beacon systems that could punch signals through planetary cores. The galaxy's finest survival equipment, representing thousands of years of accumulated knowledge from species who'd mastered their environments through superior technology. The practical examination commences at 2000 hours, Corfel announced as the lecture concluded. Meteorological analysis predicts a Category 7 blizzard will arrive shortly thereafter. Perfect conditions for demonstrating proper equipment utilization. You will establish individual shelters in designated zones and maintain position until dawn retrieval. Straightforward application of protocols covered today. He paused, that middle left eye finding Marcus again. Those concerned about personal limitations should feel no shame in requesting additional equipment allowances. Survival is not competitive. The unspoken addition, especially for those biologically disadvantaged, hung in the recycled air like a particularly condescending cloud. 16 hours later, the equipment distribution center buzzed with pre-examination activity. Students collected their assigned gear, checking specifications against datapads, running diagnostic protocols on thermal suits that cost more than small spacecraft. The VREX students clustered together, comparing heat generation settings. A shardling, named Facet of Dawn, calibrated his shelter's crystalline matrix to resonate at frequencies that would repel snow accumulation. The Morphids, naturally resistant to temperature extremes through their variable density bodies, still loaded up on backup equipment because institutional requirements were institutional requirements. Marcus stood at his collection station, reviewing a gear manifest that looked suspiciously sparse compared to his classmates. One standard thermal suit, rated for -50°C. One emergency shelter pod, the basic model without climate control upgrades. 1 week's rations compressed. A standard issue survival knife that looked decorative next to the molecular edge tools other students carried. A coil of synthetic rope. A lighter that probably wouldn't function in high winds. And because someone in the equipment office had either a sense of humor or genuine concern, 3 emergency beacon flares. That's insufficient loadout, observed a student named Resonance Through Stone, her crystalline form refracting the warehouse lights into prismatic judgments. You should request environmental upgrades. The basic shelter won't maintain livable temperatures in Category 7 conditions. Appreciate the concern, Marcus replied, signing off on the manifest. I'm good though. Pride is statistically correlated with survival failure, she pressed, her internal harmonics suggesting genuine worry rather than superiority. Request additional equipment. Nobody will consider it weakness. Marcus smiled the particularly annoying smile. Humans deployed when they knew something nobody else did. Really, I'm good. But thanks. He also collected items not on the official manifest, purchased from his personal funds at the station commissary. A small folding shovel that looked absurdly primitive next to the thermal excavation tools other students carried. A tarp, some cord, a plastic garbage bag. The commissary clerk, a retired Vendorian explorer, had given him a knowing look that suggested she'd seen this particular shopping list before, but said nothing. Some lessons needed learning firsthand. The storm briefing took place in the operations center, where holographic displays showed the incoming blizzard with uncomfortable detail. Category 7 storms on Arcturus 7 didn't mess around. Wind speeds approaching 200 kilometers per hour. Temperature drops to -70°C before factoring wind chill. Visibility reduced to arm's length at best, 0 at worst. Snow accumulation rates that could bury a shelter in under an hour. The sort of weather that made planets reconsider hosting survival academies. Shelters will be established in grid sectors 12 through 19, the operations coordinator explained, highlighting zones on the topographical display. Spacing minimum 100 meters between students. Emergency protocols remain standard. If your beacon activates, extraction teams will reach you within 20 minutes, weather permitting. She paused meaningfully. Weather rarely permits during Category 7 events. Extraction times may extend to several hours. Plan accordingly. Professor Kvalnarex observed from the back of the operations center, his carapace reflecting the holographic storm data in unsettling ways. Several students glanced toward Marcus, clearly expecting him to request additional support or enhanced equipment, now that the reality of Category 7 conditions was properly visualized. He continued reviewing his sector assignment, expression neutral, apparently unconcerned about the meteorological nightmare bearing down on them. All students confirm understanding of emergency protocols, the coordinator continued. Equipment failure procedures, medical emergency responses, extraction signal protocols. This is live environment training. The weather will not adjust for miscalculation. Her translator carried the weight of someone who'd pulled too many bodies from too many storms. If you have any doubts about your preparation, now is the time to address them. Silence answered. Pride, apparently, was a multi-species constant. 2,000 hours arrived with the first wind gusts, which hit the equipment staging area like atmospheric punishment for institutional hubris. Students loaded into transport sleds, their gear secured in weatherproof containers that would accompany them to assigned sectors. The sky had achieved that particular pre-storm darkness that suggested nature was actively irritated about something. Clouds roiled overhead, pregnant with enough frozen precipitation to bury the entire facility several times over. Marcus's transport sled delivered him to Grid Sector 15, a relatively flat expanse of ice-crusted tundra that would become completely indistinguishable from everywhere else once the storm hit properly. The automated sled dumped his equipment, confirmed his beacon registration, and departed with the mechanical indifference of a system that had delivered hundreds of students to various forms of environmental misery. He stood alone in the gathering wind, watching the horizon disappear as the storm's leading edge arrived with enthusiasm. Most students immediately deployed their shelters, those 45-second marvels of engineering that would theoretically maintain comfort while the moon tried to kill everything on its surface. Thermal signatures bloomed across the operations center's tracking display as climate-controlled bubbles of civilization appeared in the designated grid sectors. Inside those shelters, students activated heating elements, sealed environmental locks, and settled in for a long night of demonstrating that superior technology meant superior survival. Marcus did not deploy his shelter. Instead, he pulled out the folding shovel and started digging. The snow wasn't deep yet, maybe 30 centimeters, but the layer beneath had compacted into something workable. He moved methodically, piling snow into a growing mound, his movements practiced and efficient. The technique was old, older than interstellar travel, older than most of the civilizations currently represented in the Survival Academy. Older than written language, actually, dating back to human ancestors who'd figured out that frozen water made excellent insulation if you understood its properties. The wind hit 40 kilometers per hour, then 60, then kept climbing with the enthusiasm of a storm that took its Category 7 rating seriously. Snow began falling in earnest, thick flakes that reduced visibility to a few meters. Marcus kept digging, kept piling, creating a dome-shaped mound approximately 2 meters in diameter and 1.5 meters high. Not impressive by architectural standards, but adequate for purposes. Other students watching their tracking displays from inside climate-controlled comfort probably assumed the human had simply failed to deploy his shelter properly. Professor Kavalnerix, monitoring from the operations center, felt vindication and worry competing for dominance in his thermal-resistant organs. By the time visibility dropped to 0 and wind speeds exceeded 100 kilometers per hour, Marcus had hollowed out the interior of his snow mound, creating a chamber just large enough for one person to sit comfortably. He'd left a small ventilation hole at the top because suffocation was counterproductive to survival. The entrance tunnel angled upward slightly, preventing wind from blowing directly inside while letting cold air drain out naturally. He'd lined the floor with the tarp and his emergency thermal blanket, creating a barrier against ground cold. The garbage bag held his gear, keeping it dry and organized. Then he crawled inside, sealed the entrance behind him with packed snow blocks, and settled in for the night. The temperature inside the Quingy, as this particular shelter style was called in one of humanity's many languages, stabilized around -5 Celsius. Outside, the storm raged at -70. The difference wasn't technology, it was physics. Snow, being mostly air trapped between ice crystals, insulated beautifully. The air pocket Marcus had created became a thermal battery, warmed by his body heat, and held stable by several tons of compressed frozen water. No fusion generators required, no metamaterial heat weaving, just understanding that the same substance trying to kill you could, with proper application, keep you alive. Marcus ate a ration bar, drank some water from his insulated bottle, and settled in to wait for dawn. Outside, the storm reached its peak fury around midnight, with wind speeds that would have stripped paint from hull plating. Snow accumulated at rates that made the meteorologists checking their instruments wonder if the sensors were malfunctioning. The Category 7 designation proved conservative, if anything. In Grid Sector 12, a VREX student's thermal suit developed a power coupling failure, sending her scrambling for her emergency shelter while her extremities went numb. The shelter deployed successfully, but without the suit's supplementary heating. Maintaining comfortable temperature became a struggle, requiring constant adjustment of the climate controls. In Sector 14, Facet of Dawn discovered that his crystalline shelter's snow-repelling resonance actually worked too well, creating a bare patch that made his shelter a wind target. The structure held, being crystalline and essentially indestructible, but the vibrations from 200-kilometer winds made sleep impossible and threatened to crack his matrix if sustained too long. In Sector 17, a morphid named Flows Between States found that her variable density biology, while excellent for temperature regulation, didn't appreciate extended exposure to Category 7 conditions. She remained alive and technically comfortable, but her shelter's climate control worked overtime to maintain the precise temperature gradient she required. In Sector 15, Marcus's biggest challenge was boredom. The Quingy maintained stable temperature through simple thermodynamics. The storm couldn't reach him through a meter of compressed snow. His body heat, normally lost to the environment, was recycled by the insulating properties of his shelter. He'd brought a book on his datapad, an actual paper book being impractical, and read about pre-spaceflight human history, while the moon outside tried and failed to kill him. The operations center tracked all students through their beacons, monitoring vital signs and environmental conditions, with the paranoid attention of administrators who really didn't want to explain student deaths to the Interstellar Survival Academy's board of directors. Professor Karl Marix maintained vigil through the night, his concern for the human student growing as hours passed without emergency beacon activation. Either Marcus was surviving adequately, or he'd frozen too quickly to trigger distress signals. The professor's 17 eyes couldn't close simultaneously for sleep anyway, so he watched and worried, and contemplated whether his lecture about human limitations had been premature. Dawn arrived with the storm's grudging retreat, Category 7 fury downgrading to merely catastrophic conditions before finally breaking into clear, brutally cold morning. The sun rose over a landscape transformed into frozen desolation, everything buried under snow measured in meters rather than centimeters. Emergency extraction teams deployed immediately, their vehicles equipped for the sort of rescue operations that justified the Academy's insurance premiums. They found the wrecked student first, alive but hypothermic, her shelter's climate control having drained its power reserves around 4 in the morning. Emergency warming protocols were initiated. Facet of Dawn was extracted from his vibrating crystalline prison, structurally intact but mentally exhausted from 18 hours of resonant torture. The Morphid required careful temperature management during extraction, but had survived adequately. Across all sectors, students emerged in various states of technological success and failure, their expensive equipment having performed mostly as advertised with occasional spectacular exceptions. Grid Sector 15 presented a mystery. The tracking display showed Marcus's beacon active and his vital signs stable, but visual scanning revealed no deployed shelter. Just snow, meters deep, covering everything. The extraction team leader, a grizzled Krell veteran named Stones bearing witness, approached the beacon coordinates with the expectation of finding a buried emergency shelter or possibly a frozen corpse. Instead, she found a small hole in the snow, barely visible, with warm air rising from it in visible vapor. Further investigation revealed the entrance tunnel, and crawling inside, she discovered Marcus sitting comfortably in his hollowed-out snow dome, finishing breakfast and reading his datapad. "Morning," he said pleasantly, as if discovered reading in a library rather than inside a pile of frozen water after Category 7 storm exposure. Storm passed. Stones bearing witness had seen many things in her 40 years of survival training and rescue operations. She'd extracted students from lava flows, toxic atmospheres, and one memorable incident involving a temporal anomaly that aged everyone nearby by 17 years. She'd never encountered someone who'd survived a Category 7 blizzard inside a pile of snow they'd assembled themselves, looking comfortable and well-rested. "You," she said finally, her translator struggling with the Krell emotion somewhere between respect and confusion, "built a shelter from snow during a blizzard." "Quingy," Marcus corrected, crawling out of the entrance tunnel. "Snow cave is different technique. Quingy is specifically building a pile then hollowing it. Better structural integrity for this snow consistency. You used the material trying to kill you as shelter from itself." "Well, yeah," Snow's like 90% air. Great insulator. Stays around freezing inside from body heat alone. Whole thing probably took 45 minutes to build. He gestured at the dome, already partially collapsed from his exit, but clearly sufficient for purposes. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years, long before fusion heaters. The extraction team documented everything, taking thermal scans that showed the Quincy's interior had maintained -5°C, while exterior temperatures reached -70. No power source, no technological climate control, just compressed snow and basic physics. The documentation would later become required reading at the academy, but at that moment it was simply confusing evidence that primitive techniques had outperformed advanced engineering. Professor Kowalczyk's arrived with the second wave of extraction teams, ostensibly to ensure all students were safely recovered, but primarily to see the human survival method firsthand. He circled the Quincy like it was a physics violation, his 17 eyes examining it from every angle, while his translator emitted sounds suggesting deep cognitive dissonance. "This is snow," he stated, touching the dome's exterior. "Yep," Marcus confirmed. "You survived Category 7 conditions inside compressed frozen water. Basically, without technological heating. Body heat works fine if you don't let it escape. That's what the snow does. Traps the heat." The professor's carapace shifted colors, a Thermalian indication of processing information that contradicted established understanding. "This violates no physical laws," he said slowly, working through it, yet contradicts optimal survival protocols as established by 17 species collective knowledge. "Does it though?" Marcus asked, and there was no smugness in the question, just genuine curiosity. "Or does it just use different knowledge? Your species evolved on a volcanic world, mine evolved on one with ice ages. Different problems, different solutions. The technological approach is universal," Kowalczyk insisted, but the confidence that had characterized his lecture was absent. "Superior engineering provides superior outcomes, unless it fails, or runs out of power, or breaks in ways you didn't anticipate." Marcus gestured at the Quincy. "This can't fail. It's literally the environment using itself. No moving parts, no power requirements, no complex engineering that needs perfect conditions to function." Stone's bearing witness made a sound that her translator rendered as amused agreement. "The student demonstrates valid points, Professor. Technological dependence creates technological vulnerabilities. Primitive methods sometimes prove robust precisely because they're primitive." The trip back to the facility was quiet, students processing their various levels of survival success and equipment performance. Marcus rode in the transport sled next to Resonance Through Stone, who kept looking at him like he'd spontaneously developed new physics. "You could have died," she said finally, her crystalline structure humming with concern. "Could have," Marcus agreed. "But humans have been not dying in blizzards for a really long time. We're pretty good at it, actually. Our ancestors walked into ice ages with nothing but fur and fire and figured it out. I had modern materials and actual knowledge of thermodynamics. Honestly, this was easy mode. You built a shelter from the storm itself. That's not easy. That's borderline insane. Or practical. Depends on your perspective." He smiled that annoying human smile again. "Your crystalline shelter was impressive. Probably would have been perfect in different conditions. But sometimes the old ways work because they've survived every possible failure mode already. Hard to improve on thousands of years of field testing." The academic fallout from the blizzard incident, as it became known in academy records, was extensive and uncomfortable for everyone who'd confidently lectured about technological superiority. Professor Kowalczyk, to his credit, didn't double down on being wrong. Instead, he did something remarkable for an academic. He admitted inadequate knowledge and requested information. Marcus ended up giving a supplementary lecture on primitive human cold-weather survival techniques, covering everything from snow shelters to fire-starting to layered clothing principles. The attending students treated it like anthropological curiosity at first, then with growing respect as they realized these techniques represented genuine survival knowledge rather than historical trivia. The fact that primitive methods had outperformed their expensive equipment in identical conditions was difficult to argue with. The fundamental error, Keval Nurix admitted during a revised curriculum meeting, was assuming technological advancement made ancestral knowledge obsolete. We neglected that survival knowledge persists because it functions. Humans maintained these techniques not from primitivism, but from practicality. The Academy's curriculum was updated to include low-technology survival methods alongside the standard equipment protocols. Students now learn to build emergency shelters from environmental materials, start fires without fusion igniters, and navigate without satellite guidance. The equipment loadouts remained unchanged because superior technology was still superior, but the philosophy shifted. Technology was the preferred method, not the only method. Redundancy through diversity of technique. Marcus passed the survival training module with highest marks, which surprised nobody after he'd casually demonstrated that humans could survive Category 7 blizzards using Stone Age technology. His classmates' attitudes shifted from dismissive to cautiously respectful. The human who'd looked least prepared had been most prepared, just in ways nobody expected. Resonance Through Stone approached him after the final examination results posted. "I researched human environmental history," she said, without preamble. "Your species survived ice ages, plural, multiple extinction-level climate events. We're persistent," Marcus acknowledged, "and creative about not freezing to death. You colonized every climate zone on your homeworld before developing advanced technology. Deserts, Arctic regions, tropical zones, mountains, everywhere. Seemed like the thing to do. Got crowded otherwise. That's not normal. Most species master their primary environment, then develop technology before expanding. You expanded first, adapted biologically and culturally, then invented technology afterward." Marcus considered this. "I guess we're backwards that way. We learned to survive everywhere, then built tools to make it easier. Not the other way around. It explains why you don't rely on technology the way other species do. You have backup strategies, because your ancestors needed backup strategies. It's cultural inheritance. Also, we break our technology a lot," Marcus admitted. "Humans are really good at breaking things accidentally. Having non-technological alternatives is just common sense." The semester concluded with students dispersed to various specialization tracks, their understanding of survival enlarged by the uncomfortable lesson that sometimes the primitive approach was the sophisticated one. Professor Keval Nurix incorporated the blizzard incident into his standard lecture series, using it to demonstrate that assumptions about species limitations required regular re-examination. He never quite got comfortable with the idea that compressed frozen water made effective shelter, but he acknowledged its validity. The Quingy Marcus had built was photographed, scanned and documented before the spring thaw destroyed it. Those images appeared in survival training materials across 17 species educational institutions, usually with captions expressing bemused respect for human adaptability. The story became one of those teaching tales that survived because it illustrated something important about assumptions, technology, and the difference between sophistication and complexity. On Arcturus 7, where weather continued conspiring against biological life with Category 7 enthusiasm, the Interstellar Survival Academy updated its motto. Previously it had read, "Technology conquers environment." The new version acknowledged a humbler truth: survival requires adaptation. It was less confident but more accurate, which described most lessons learned the hard way. Marcus eventually graduated with honors and went on to teach environmental survival courses himself, specializing in low-technology techniques for high-risk situations. His students, representing dozens of species from across the galaxy, learned that human survival knowledge wasn't primitive or obsolete. It was simply different, refined by necessity, and proven by millennia of not dying in environments that should have killed everyone involved. When Category 7 storms rolled across Arcturus 7, students would look at the falling snow and think not about their thermal suits and climate-controlled shelters, but about the physics of compressed frozen water and the ways that solutions sometimes came from understanding the problem rather than overwhelming it with technology. It wasn't a comfortable thought for species that prided themselves on engineering superiority, but comfort, as any survivor could explain, was less important than effectiveness. The galaxy was vast and full of species who'd solved survival in countless different ways. Humans had simply solved it by being stubborn enough to survive everything their homeworld threw at them, then remembering how they'd done it. Not with better tools, though those helped. With better knowledge, passed down through generations who'd learned that snow could kill you or shelter you depending on your understanding of its nature. It was, the galaxy grudgingly admitted, a very human approach. Practical, persistent, and profoundly annoying to anyone who'd confidently assumed they knew better.